Welcome to the Stormsurf video surf forecast for the week starting Sunday, May 10th. Looking at significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean, we see not a whole lot going on. One small gale producing 30-foot seas over a tiny area, but otherwise a fairly placid pattern. Let's dig into the details. First, we'll examine jet stream level winds. These winds, up about 30,000 feet, help support the formation of storms, and when those storms do form, help direct their path. Right now, we have not a favorable flow, a split jet stream pattern over the New Zealand area with a ridge pushing south towards Antarctica, pretty much not supporting low pressure development in this area. Right here, though, in the Tasman Sea, definitely low pressure being supported. Low pressure in the upper atmosphere rotates clockwise. This eddy or flow like this sets up a clockwise flow, and that also manifests itself down at the surface, help supporting low pressure. So perhaps low pressure could develop in this region, generating swell pushing towards Fiji. Otherwise, we kind of have a split muddled flow, a little bit of what could be considered a trough here in the southeast Pacific, and we know for a fact that low pressure is in this area, but nothing strong and nothing significant. Putting this into motion, we are watching this ridge, this southward push here. That definitely supports high pressure, split in the jet, high pressure between the two branches of the jet, and that is as of Monday night, taking control, continuing well into Tuesday and Wednesday, and it just sort of rolls from there. A little bit, here's a nice trough that starts developing on Friday here in the southeast Pacific. A little bit of wind, but not a lot of strength. Most of the energy is up in here, and you really want the strength of the wind, the most of it pushing up into the trough. That gets that clockwise circulation going. Anyway, we're in Friday, and more of the same continues, just basically a really split flow or a big ridge pushing south here, and we're into Saturday, Sunday, and it only gets worse as we roll out to Sunday night a week from now. So things look like they're taking a break in the southern hemi, at least in terms of the upper level flow. Next, we go down to the surface. Surface level pressure, surface level winds. We're looking for fetch in excess of 40 knots. We have one little pocket here, 40 knot winds, pushing mainly east. We know this is generating a small area of barely 30-foot seas. And as we put this into motion, that fetch kind of falls apart and starts pushing east out of the Southern California swell window. This is an area of concern over here too, 35 knot winds, but notice, pushing directly south into Antarctica, high pressure building right where you would expect the storm track to be. And in fact, that high pressure continues to build. You have south winds going down this side into Antarctica and nothing really happening over on the east quadrant of that high. And it just sort of continues. The storm track, now notice here, Tasman Sea, fetch 45 knots, pushing up towards Fiji. Good for swell production there. And some of that swell, if it does develop, could theoretically radiate into Hawaii, but none of it will make it to the U.S. West Coast. Anyway, high pressure really building 1036 millibars, kind of locking down the Central Pacific this by Friday, and that same pattern continues. A little bit of fetch here now aimed at Chile, but really nothing for California, and that just goes on. We're into Sunday now. Interesting here. 174 hours out, this is what would be called a cutoff low. Here, theoretically, with 40 knot winds aimed to the north, if that were to happen, and 45 knots, interesting. We'll see whether this actually materializes, but cutoff lows typically show strong on the models at the surface, but never develop as strong as they appear. Still, something to monitor. And finally, significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean. We're going back in time, Tuesday, the 5th of May. Small fetch here developing central South Pacific. Builds a little bit. 26-foot seas aimed to the north, somewhat up the Great Circle Paths into Southern California. Notice almost 30 plus 5 degrees off the 193 degree track into Southern California. Mainly, this is just a primer system. 26-foot seas really don't generate enough period for swell to make it the whole way up into California. But behind it, another gale develops, gets the winds from that gale, this was on Wednesday, get traction on already roughed up ocean surface and quickly develop 41-foot seas on Wednesday night. These aimed up the, about the 185 degree track. Notice they're not really aimed to the north. Notice it's actually almost 45 degrees off the Great Circle Pass into Southern California. Really aimed more at Chile. We'll try Costa Rica here and well up the Great Circle Pass, Costa Rica, Peru, that area. Anyway, roll this out, seas build, peak out, oops, right there at about, what is that, about 44 feet or so. Again, the same issue relative to California, 45 degrees off the Great Circle track there. Again, more aimed into Central California and Peru. Oh, here we go. Here's the Peru Great Circle track. You can see it there. Anyway, that's good for swell. That swell is in the water, working its way to the north, expected later in the week relative to California. All this fetch well east of any tracks into Hawaii. No swell expected there. Roll this out, and then we start moving into Friday, Saturday, and now our current situation, that one little fetch down in southeast Pacific, generating 30-foot seas relative to Southern California. What's that, about the 190 degree track or so, but so small, probably next to nothing going to show up except at the very top standout spots in Southern California. And then fetch, we saw this building in the Tasman Sea about midweek, trying to get a footing, but just doesn't quite get it together. You get 32-foot seas aimed up into Fiji, but, you know, a short little thing, and that fades out. And then you literally can see high pressure, no seas of interest right here, and that is by Friday. And also notice this, whatever fetch is happening, pushing south. Again, we saw that. We saw the fetch going to the south, and then just very modest fetch, and all this is for the most part outside of the California swell window, really targeting Chile. And that, then we get towards the end here, and that last little fetch we saw trying to develop here off New Zealand, tiny, not a whole lot going on, at least in this run of the models. So for now, there is swell in the water, and going to be another little shot of swell. Make the most of that, because long-term things do not look particularly optimistic for the for the South Pacific. And now just a quick review of the North Pacific significant wave heights for the coming week. We just roll this out. We do notice here a broad area of low pressure is forecast west of the date line, maybe, what is that, a little area of 20-foot seas. Also, supposedly a gale. This is on Monday, up in the northern Gulf, 22-foot seas potentially there. The max wave heights, though, are all being at 31 feet, are all associated with a tropical system in the far west Pacific that is not expected to do anything relative to our forecast area. Roll this out. So this is good, probably for some 13-second period swell into the U.S. West Coast. This again on Monday, and maybe some swell from this. This is what, 21.9 feet relative to Hawaii, maybe a little bit of swell to result from that. And then even more seas are forecast here on Wednesday in the 22-foot range. Again, pretty far out, but again, good for background swell for probably Hawaii or so. It's hard to believe that any of this is really going to develop as forecast. The tropical area, though, is very active indeed. Systems moving off to the west, and just noticing here the last couple of frames of this system looks to be tracking to the north. It would be really interesting to see if this develops as strong as projected and then recurves to the northeast. The jet stream actually is doing pretty well across the North Pacific this time. Not unusual. If it were doing that in July, we would be very interested, but this being only just early May, we're still on the downswing from the previous winter. We would start picking up early signs of what might come for the fall in about the July timeframe. We monitor jet stream winds here and try to pick up early signs, especially if there's any sort of a developing El Nino or the MJO is raging particularly, but way too early for that now. But let's get into the long-term forecast. First up, the Southern Oscillation Index, difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti. Right now, the Southern Oscillation Index is strongly negative, major active phase of the MJO. If you want to call it that, we don't even think it's the active phase of the MJO. Something else is going on, but definitely low pressure centered over Tahiti, driving the Southern Oscillation Index negative, very negative. The daily numbers down at minus 44.1, 30-day running average minus 7.47, the 90-day average dropping now at minus 6.13. Negative numbers, again, are perhaps an indicator of at least the active phase of the MJO. Prolonged negative numbers, like over in here, if this was down at about -20, would suggest the development of El Nino. In fact, here you can see Tahiti here, low pressure south of Tahiti. This is what is driving the SOI negative. Over time, we'll see that low pressure to dissipate and move out, though generally low pressure to hang through Wednesday, and then perhaps here another low pressure developing on Friday. We'll believe it when we see it. Probably not strong enough to have a major impact, but still something to monitor just the same. Certainly not high pressure forecast for this area. If you're tracking the MJO, another hallmark of the MJO is westerly anomalies. That's not necessarily westerly winds, but a slackening of the trades in the what we call the Kelvin wave generation area, roughly 130, a couple degrees either side of the equator, 130 east to about 170 west. Westerly anomalies in this area support the formation of Kelvin waves. Kelvin waves are, of course, warm water that tracks under the equator from the West Pacific to the East Pacific, gurgle up off the Galapagos, and start warming tropics in the far East Pacific, where normally there is a strong upwelling flow and cold water. That is the hallmark of El Nino. Anyway, so right now there has been a massive Kelvin wave that was developed from westerly winds, westerly anomalies that occurred in January, February, and March. Those westerly anomalies did not dissipate. They were weak in April, and now here we are in May, and they appear to be building again, and this is good news because last year we had strong westerly anomalies in the January, February, March time frame, made a major Kelvin wave. Everyone started saying El Nino was coming, but after that, there was no strong westerly anomalies, just weak events, and things basically, there was no backup, no secondary or tertiary Kelvin waves moving into the Galapagos in the summer time frame, and El Nino never developed. But this year, it appears at this early stage, and we're still in the spring unpredictability barrier, so what really matters is not models, not forecasts, but what's actually happening at the ocean surface. Right now, we have westerly anomalies. Nothing strong. Actually, this is reasonably strong. This is up at the about 4,500 feet, the 850 millibar level. Looking promising. We'll get into the details here in a second. Anyway, so this is Australia, West Pacific. Dateline here. Those anomalies die off over the dateline. As we move south of Hawaii, a basically neutral flow in process, if not weak easterly anomalies, not unusual for this area. Here's where things get interesting. Here a week out, notice strong westerly anomalies are forecast, again in the Kelvin wave generation area. 2 tropical systems also in play, and these westerly anomalies, though they don't make it over the dateline, all they got to do is be between about 130 east and 170 west. They clearly are right in the heart of the Kelvin wave generation area. This suggests that perhaps another Kelvin wave is developing right on the heels of a strong one that's just now starting to gurgle up along the Galapagos Islands. Anyway, looking over to the East Pacific a week out, again, a weak easterly to almost dead neutral normal flow in this area. Also, looking down at the surface, here's actual wind directions and speeds and water temperatures, and what we see is and this is anomalies here, certainly westerly anomalies in the Kelvin wave generation area, but this chart also depicts full-on westerly winds, not light, fairly strong, working their way to the dateline. And yet, one more view, the box represents the Kelvin wave generation area, and this is from the GFS model, actual wind speeds and directions, and you can see clearly not only westerly anomalies, but westerly winds in the 24 to 26 knot range, and lesser anomalies right in the heart of the Kelvin wave generation area, really associated with a tropical system to the north, but still, westerly winds are westerly winds no matter how you get it. And if you look at the forecast, some form of westerly winds, this here is in the a 16 to 18 knot range. Typically in here, you've got trades blowing from 15 knots or greater out of the east. We're nowhere close to that, and nowhere near is any of that forecast. Westerly anomalies, not only anomalies, actually westerly winds forecast. We're out 100 plus hours, and then finally you see trades starting to build in 126 hours out. But then the thought is, here's yet more light westerly winds. We're just going to roll this out for a week. So generally, things look pretty good in the Kelvin wave generation area. Next up, a historical look back in time. Reds are westerly anomalies. Blues are easterly anomalies, and the main area we're concerned with is about here to here. This chart is the whole globe. We're interested in the West Pacific Ocean, Kelvin wave generation area in particular. And notice as we work down our way into the 5th of May, very strong westerly anomalies. One can say these are certainly westerly winds, and that is where we are right now. A full certified westerly wind burst in effect, and interesting, for the week-long forecast, it is to continue. This is a good sign. This would be, from let's say the 5th of May till, the 17th. Now, so 12 days of out-and-out westerly winds and westerly anomalies. We would want more than that, but this would be a good start in supporting development of a new Kelvin wave. Now, here's the interesting thing. This chart, outgoing long wave radiation, you can use it to look for the presence of the MJO, and you see absolutely nothing going on. The blue would be, it would take a much larger blue area to be what would be considered a real active phase of the MJO, and the inactive phase, here's the yellow, would have to be considerably bigger. Basically nothing per the statistical model either occurring now or forecast for the next 15 days. And then looking at the dynamic model, basically the same deal, a slight tendency towards the active phase, but nothing that would be considered active, and supposedly an inactive phase building in the Indian Ocean, 8 days out, but it too dissipates. So this is some indication, and typically when you get El Nino going, what happens is the MJO disappears completely, but yet you still have westerly anomalies. That appears to be what's going on at the moment. It's very early in the process. One cannot say for sure, but this is certainly a step in the right direction. Now, the upper level model here, 40-day, up at the jet stream level, suggests greens are the support for precipitation in lower levels of the atmosphere. And typically one associates something this strong with the active phase of the MJO, but we're not seeing any of it on the other charts. Anyway, precipitation is supported, one would say, the active phase working its way into Central America through about the 20th of May, with the inactive phase behind it making its typical normal track from west to east across the equatorial Pacific into about June 4th or so, and then sort of a mixed pattern following behind that, slightly active into June 19th or so. We don't really think any of this is associated with the MJO, but some other form of activity in play. Next up, sea surface temperature anomalies. Differences from normal for this time of year for the planet. The El Nino area, Nino 3.4 region, between 170 west and 120, you're looking for warmer than normal temperatures, just a couple degrees either side of the equator in here. Notice significant warming starting to develop between the Galapagos and the coast of Ecuador. This associated with the Kelvin wave that was generated January, February, March, now starting to impact the coast here and starting to warm surface waters. What happens is trades pick up this warm water, start blowing it, advecting it over here into the Nino 3.4 region. When you have warm water in here, then one declares an El Nino if it's long enough and warm enough and holds together. What we had last winter was warm water over here, not over here, but here in the Central Pacific. That's what they call a Modoki El Nino, and doesn't have the same impacts as if the warm water's over here. When it's over here, then that enhances the jet stream. That's what also really pumps up storm activity in the Gulf of Alaska. That makes giant surf. It also brings storm after storm down further south than normal into California, even into Southern California and Baja. That's what we're looking for or hoping for. 1, to break the drought. 2, to promote surf in the fall of 2015. A long ways to go. Anyway, we have warm water here. Nothing, I mean, it is warm, but it's not over the top warm. The deal is we want to see this warm, and then we want to see another Kelvin wave develop, which will then give us more warm water to backfill in here 3 months later. We don't know whether that's going to happen, but right now the pattern looks favorable. In this chart, we saw it before, but now we're really looking at ocean surface temperature anomalies. And notice here, 1 degree anomalies over the whole equatorial Pacific. But notice this, 2.5 degree anomalies here, and Ecuador is off the chart. It's over at like 80 west. So we already have 2 degree anomalies working their way. Here's where the start of the Nino 3.4 region would be. So warm water building here. Also warm water, 1.5 degrees here where those westerly anomalies are blowing. That warm water will get pushed to depth to create the next Kelvin wave in the series, and hopefully it will be strong enough. Next up, the subsurface picture. West Pacific here, East Pacific here, warm water, the profile, but not the actual temperatures that matter so much. It is the anomalies, differences from normal. And notice we have here a large pocket of very warm water, 5 degrees above normal, and again, working its way into the Galapagos and Ecuador coast. And the reality is, this is at 95 west. Ecuador is off over here. So really, this Kelvin wave is just starting to impact the coast now and just starting to warm surface waters above it. Notice also here, you can barely see it, but the shading is still definitely suggestive of warmer water falling to depth and starting to backfill in this area. This is where the Kelvin waves get developed. So you have west winds blowing here. That pushes warm water to depth. It sits here, accumulates, and then starts migrating to the east. This is the large Kelvin wave from the January, February, March time frame. It takes about 3 months to make its way across the Pacific. It is impacting that area. This is a better view here because it actually goes off. So this is what, 100 west. So that's about 80 west. This really shows what's really happening here. Notice the heart of the Kelvin wave is just now starting to work its way into the Galapagos Ecuador area here. And that warm water, that little pocket there, the little dot, that's what's gurgling to the surface. All this warm water is still going to start pushing up. The thought is it will create a rather large pocket of warm water at the surface. Also notice here, warm water already in play way back on the other side of the date line, and more of it, you can see a little bit here, but if westerly winds are blowing, this is going to build and only start feeding the pump yet more. This is a very good sign. And then finally, the T's. From the CFS version 2 model for the Nino 3.4 area, sea surface temperature anomaly forecast. Currently, here we are in the May time frame. Water temperatures here are suggested at about 1.2 degrees above normal. Another reading, though, historical reading of actual Nino 3.4 data suggests we're really at about 0.9, so maybe the model's overhyping it just a little bit. Anyway, back to this image. So here we are currently. The forecast, according to this model, is straight up into the stratosphere from here. By July, we're talking about 2.2 degree anomalies. That would be a very solid El Nino in and of its own right, but it doesn't stop there. It goes up to 3 degree anomalies by October, and then we're talking about 3.2 degree anomalies by the November-December time frame. Seems highly optimistic. Compared to other models, this is the one that is off the chart. So here's another way to view it. This one up here, this is the CFS version 2 model. Notice it's higher than any of the other models produced by any of the other ENSO agencies worldwide, but still all of them if you look at the general consensus, they're all saying some form of warm in the, let's say, 1 degree anomaly range. Generally, if you go right down, just draw a line down the middle here in the October-November time frame. So that would be, again, basically a continuation of Modoki El Nino, not a full-scale El Nino. A real El Nino, you need 1.5 degree anomalies. You'd have to be up here. And for a super El Nino, up into the 2 degree anomaly range. The consensus says that's probably not the case. But you know what? It's really hard to guess how good any model is going out 6 months into the future. We've seen time and time again, none of them are particularly reliable. It maybe gives you a rough guide. Certainly none of them are saying that we're down into La Nina territory, which is good. So probably the more conservative estimate is that we'll be in a Modoki El Nino. But if we get into the June-July time frame and water temperatures are really building steadily week after week in the Galapagos, then we'd start looking more towards the CFS model and saying, hey, maybe there's some truth to what it has to say. We're still in the spring unpredictability barrier right now. This is that time from roughly March into the 1st of June where the models have a hard time getting a handle on anything. And the reality is the atmosphere is not sure what it's going to do. You really just have to watch day by day actuals and see the trend develop. Once you get into the June time frame, if waters are rapidly rising and that continues for 3 to 4 weeks, odds are things aren't going to fall apart, especially if there's more westerly wind bursts in the West Pacific, another Kelvin wave in flight, which kind of looks like what's happening at the moment. But we're going to wait. We're going to be cautious because we got burned last year, as did everybody else, thinking that some sort of strong El Nino was developing when, in fact, it never did happen. But we did notice that the Pacific Decadal Oscillation did shift positive and has continued to be that way. That is in favor of El Nino development, a good sign. And basically, we're just going to have to wait and see. We only have another, 3 weeks before we hit June, and then we'll have a much better sense of what is going on. So for now, there's small southern hemiswell hitting southern and northern California. That from a gale that was off of New Zealand. We didn't even discuss that, but it's there. It's going to continue all week. Larger, more southern angled swell from a stronger system with, 44-foot seas. That should be reaching the coast by later in the work week and into the early part of the weekend. But then after that, things really shut down surf-wise, at least relative to California, unless something new develops. But right now, it kind of looks like high pressure is building its grip and a split jet stream over the southern hemisphere. Minor activity for the northern hemisphere. Really doubt much of that's going to materialize. The models are probably just overhyping it a little bit. But in terms of long-term forecasts, things are certainly promising. No sign of La Nina. A lot of hints that El Nino might be developing, something to monitor. So for now, go get some surf, have a good time, keep your eye on the long-term forecast. We'll do this again next week, same time, same channel. See you then.